You know, if the American Revolution was a warning shot to kings and queens across the globe, the French Revolution, well, that was a total earthquake. It literally shattered the old world. Welcome to The Explainer. I'm really excited to guide you through this today because we are breaking down one of the most explosive, game-changing events in human history. And look, if you're preparing for your junior cert or any major history exam, you are absolutely in the right place. We've set this explainer up to be super clean, highly scannable study notes, organized exactly how those examiners want to see it. So let's just dive right in.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to follow a foolproof framework. First, causes, the old order. Second, the spark of rebellion. Third, course, the revolution explodes. Fourth, course, the reign of terror. Fifth, consequences, a changed world. And finally, number 6, a key profile on Maximilien Robespierre.
All right, part 1, causes. The old order, which you'll often hear called the Ancien Régime.
To really get why this happened, you have to look at the math behind French society at the time, because it was staggeringly unbalanced. The population was divided into these 3 distinct groups they called estates. So the first estate was the clergy, right, the church, making up less than 1% of the population. The second estate was the nobility, the lords, making up just 2%. And then you have the third estate. That was literally everyone else, making up a massive 97% of the country. So you've got a tiny 3% holding all this immense power, while the vast majority are just the masses.
And the injustice of this system went so incredibly deep. That top 3%, the clergy and nobility, they owned huge amounts of land, collected a 10% tithe from the peasants, held all the top government and army jobs, and okay, here's the absolute kicker. They paid 0 taxes. Nothing. Meanwhile, the poorest people in the third estate are basically carrying the entire country on their backs. They paid the taille, which was a land tax, the gabelle, a salt tax, and they were forced to do the corvée, which actually meant working the lord's lands completely for free.
But we shouldn't think the third estate was just poor farmers, because it wasn't. It also included the bourgeoisie. These were the educated, wealthy, middle-class professionals. We're talking merchants, doctors, lawyers. And they were reading Enlightenment writers like Voltaire and Rousseau, who were out there arguing for freedom of speech and democracy. So the really crucial point here is that you have this group of highly educated, wealthy people who are getting deeply frustrated. Because despite all their success, the rigid rules of the Ancien Régime mean they have absolutely 0 political power.
And then, as if things weren't tense enough, nature just completely turns against them. The winter of 1788 was the coldest on record. Rivers froze solid, crops were completely destroyed, and because of that, the cost of a single loaf of bread skyrocketed until it equaled 80% of an ordinary worker's daily wage. 80%! Just think about that for a second. This wasn't just some minor economic slump. This led to massive food riots and literal starvation right on the streets of Paris. So the pressure is mounting everywhere, and it's the financial triggers that finally blow the lid off the whole thing. King Louis XVI had spent 1.3 billion livres helping the Americans defeat Britain. It completely bankrupted France. It was so bad that 50% of their entire national budget was being used just to pay off the interest on their debt. Desperate, the king calls a meeting of the Estates General in May 1789 to try and pass new taxes. But the voting system was entirely rigged. Instead of voting by head count, they voted by estate. So the first and second estates could just team up and outvote the massive third estate 2-1 every single time. That was it. The financial pressure cooker finally snapped.
Moving into part 2, the spark of rebellion.
From here, the escalation happens incredibly fast. In June 1789, the fed-up Third Estate just walks right out of the Estates General, finds a nearby indoor tennis court, and swears the tennis court oath. They declare themselves the National Assembly and promise to write a fair constitution. Fast forward to July 14th, and fearing the king's mercenary troops, a furious mob storms the Bastille, which was this imposing medieval fortress and prison, just to steal gunpowder. This was a huge deal because it proved the people now controlled Paris. And by August, terrified of these huge peasant uprisings sweeping the countryside known as the Great Fear, the Assembly passes the August Decrees, officially abolishing feudalism.
Part 3, course, the revolution explodes.
So in August 1789, the National Assembly writes this groundbreaking document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man. It stated that all men were born free and equal, and it gave us this incredibly iconic slogan that you've probably heard, liberty, equality, fraternity, meaning brotherhood. It was this beautiful, lofty ideal, but as we'll see, the reality on the ground was about to get incredibly messy.
The collapse of royal power was absolute.
In 1791, King Louis and Marie Antoinette actually disguised themselves as servants and tried to flee the country to get foreign military help. They were caught at a town called Varennes. This flight to Varennes completely destroyed whatever public trust was left. By 1792, France is at war with Austria and Prussia, and in 1793, Louis and Marie Antoinette are tried for treason and executed. And they used a brand new invention for this, one designed to make execution equal for all classes, the guillotine.
Which brings us to Part 4, Course, the Reign of Terror.
To really understand the terror, you have to understand the people who were out on the streets pushing for it, the sans-culottes. These were the working-class radicals of Paris. The name literally translates to without fine knee breeches, which were the fancy pants the nobility wore. They wore regular trousers, and they were the ones demanding extreme, immediate, and very often violent action to protect the revolution from its perceived enemies.
Driven by all this street-level paranoia, a radical political group called the Jacobins suspended the Constitution entirely and handed absolute power over to a 12-man committee of public safety. They quickly passed the law of suspects, which basically allowed them to arrest anyone who even talked like an enemy of liberty. They also instituted extreme de-Christianization policies. They renamed the months, closed down churches, they even turned Notre Dame into the Temple of Reason. It was brutal. By the end of this bloody year, an estimated 40,000 people had been executed by the guillotine.
Part 5. Consequences. A changed world.
When the dust finally settled, the global impacts were just massive. The absolute power of kings in the old feudal system, permanently broken. Now in the short term, France was ruled by a pretty weak and corrupt five-man government called the Directory. But that weakness opened the door for a brilliant young general to step in. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in a coup. He centralized the government and created the Napoleonic Code, which essentially locked in that core revolutionary idea of legal equality for men, and then he spread those ideas right across Europe through his military conquests.
Now, if you were studying for your Junior Cert History exam, listen up, because this specific connection is absolutely vital. You need to connect the French Revolution to Ireland. Seeing a Catholic country overthrow a massive monarchy deeply inspired Theobald Wolfe Tone. He actually traveled to France, secured French ships and troops, and that direct military support led right to the United Irishmen's 1798 rebellion. So even though that rebellion ultimately failed, the French Revolution literally set the course for modern Irish republicanism. Part 6. Key Profile. Maximilien Robespierre.
Okay, here is exactly how you can structure your exam answer on Robespierre into 5 clear steps. Step 1. Background. Robespierre was a lawyer from Arras, famously nicknamed the Incorruptible because he utterly refused to take bribes. Step 2. Ideals. He was a radical Jacobin who, interestingly enough, initially fought against the death penalty and argued for universal male voting rights. Step 3. His rise. He gained massive popularity with the sans-culottes and became the leading voice of that Committee of Public Safety. Step 4. The terror. He tragically twisted those early ideals, eventually claiming that virtue without terror is powerless. He even executed his own close friends, like Georges Danton, when they suggested maybe stopping all the killings. And finally, Step 5. His downfall. His extreme paranoia ended up terrifying his fellow politicians. In July 1794, an event called the Thermidorian Reaction saw him arrested, shot in the jaw, and, in a twist of profound irony, sent to the exact same guillotine he had used on so many others.
Which brings us to a pretty heavy final thought. The French Revolution gave the world the absolute highest ideals of liberty, equality, and human rights, but it bought those ideals with the blood of 40,000 people at the blade of the guillotine. So, can true liberty and equality ever actually be achieved through a reign of terror? It's really the ultimate paradox of this historical earthquake. Something to think about as you review your notes. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.